January 1979. Beirut, Lebanon. Ali Hassan Salameh was getting married. Again, his third marriage. But this one felt different. Her name was Georgina Rizk. Miss Universe, 1971. Beautiful, glamorous, Lebanese Christian. He was Palestinian Muslim. The wedding was scandalous, exciting, the talk of Beirut. The celebration was lavish. Hundreds of guests, music, dancing, joy. For one night, Ali Hassan Salameh, the Red Prince, commander of Black September, one of Israel's most wanted men, was just a groom. Happy, in love, planning a future. The photographer took hundreds of photos. The couple smiling, dancing, surrounded by friends and family, moments of pure happiness captured on film. 3 weeks later, Ali Hassan Salameh was dead, killed by a car bomb on a Beirut street, torn apart, unrecognizable. The wedding photos were delivered to his widow days after the funeral, images of a man who'd been alive, who'd been happy, who'd believed he had a future, photos of a celebration that became a memorial, of joy that turned to tragedy, of a man who never saw how happy he looked in those pictures. This is not the story of how Israel killed Ali Hassan Salameh. That's been told. This is the story of his wedding, his last celebration. The happiness he felt before everything ended. The story of the photos he never saw, the future he never had, the life that looked so full of promise until it wasn't. To understand the wedding, you need to understand the man. Ali Hassan Salameh was born into Palestinian struggle. His father, Hassan Salameh, was a military commander who died fighting in 1948, a martyr, a legend. Growing up in the shadow of a martyred father shapes you. Ali felt the weight of that legacy, the expectation, the duty, the need to continue the fight. He joined Fatah, then Black September, rose to prominence, became operational commander, planned operations, including, allegedly, the Munich Olympics massacre in 1972. 11 Israeli athletes killed. The world watched in horror. And Ali Hassan Salameh became one of the most wanted men on earth. Israel launched Operation Wrath of God. Hunt down everyone involved in Munich. Kill them, one by one. And Salameh was the primary target, the Red Prince, the mastermind, the one who must be eliminated. For years, Mossad hunted him, across Europe, across the Middle East, close calls, near misses, mistakes like Lillehammer where they killed the wrong man. But Salameh survived. He was careful, paranoid, changed locations, used security, lived like a man who knew people were trying to kill him. But he also lived. Because you can't spend every moment in fear. You can't exist in pure survival mode forever. So he fell in love with Georgina Rizk, and he decided to marry her, even knowing the risks, even knowing Mossad was hunting, even knowing that happiness made you vulnerable. He chose to live, to love, to celebrate, and for 3 weeks it seemed like maybe he could have both, safety and happiness, caution and joy, until he couldn't. The wedding was planned for early January 1979. Exact date unclear. Some sources say January 1st, others say mid-January. Salameh kept it deliberately vague for security. But it happened, in Beirut, a city that in 1979 was still relatively safe, still glamorous, still the Paris of the Middle East before the Civil War destroyed it completely. The guest list was eclectic. Palestinian fighters, Lebanese socialites, politicians, artists, the mix of Salameh's two worlds, the revolutionary and the romantic. Georgina was Christian. Salameh was Muslim. The marriage was controversial, but in Beirut in 1979, such marriages happened. Love crossing religious lines. Hope that maybe those divisions could be overcome. The ceremony itself was private, intimate, just family and close friends. But the reception was grand. Salameh wanted to celebrate, wanted everyone to see his happiness, Wanted, maybe, to prove to himself that he could have a normal life, that he wasn't just a target, just a revolutionary, just a man waiting to die. He could be a husband, a lover, a man with a future. For one night, he believed that. The reception was held at a luxury venue in Beirut. Music, food, dancing, all the trappings of a high society Lebanese wedding. Salameh wore a suit, not military fatigues, not the uniform of a fighter, a suit, like any other groom. Georgina wore white, a traditional wedding dress. Beautiful. She'd been Miss Universe. She knew how to command a room, and on her wedding night she did. They danced, the traditional first dance, Salameh holding his bride, smiling, looking happier than anyone had seen him in years. Friends said later, he was transformed that night. The tension he usually carried, the paranoia, the awareness of danger, it melted away. For those hours, he was just Ali, just a man in love. The photographer circulated, capturing moments. The couple at the head table, Salameh laughing at a joke, Georgina adjusting her dress, friends toasting, family embracing, hundreds of photos, moments of joy, frozen in time. None of them knowing that in 3 weeks these would be memorial photos, images of a dead man celebrating life. The wedding night stretched into early morning. Music, dancing, celebration. At some point, Salameh stepped outside, needed air, needed a moment alone. A friend found him, smoking, looking at the Beirut skyline. "Everything okay?" "Yes, perfect. I needed to remember this moment, to hold on to it." "Why? You'll have thousands more moments." Salameh smiled. Sad smile. "Maybe, but this one I want to remember." Did he know? Did some instinct tell him this wouldn't last? That happiness was temporary? That the hunt would eventually end? Or was he just being philosophical? Recognizing that all moments are fleeting, that joy should be savored because it's rare? We can't know. But he stood there, smoking, looking at the city, trying to hold on to happiness even as it was happening. The honeymoon was brief, a few days. Salameh couldn't leave Beirut for long, couldn't be away from his security network. They stayed in Lebanon, a hotel, privacy, time together. Georgina later said, "Those days were the happiest of our marriage." He was relaxed, he smiled, he talked about the future, about children, about growing old together. He talked about retiring, moving somewhere quiet, maybe Cyprus, somewhere he could stop looking over his shoulder, stop living like a hunted man. He said, "Maybe now I can just be Ali, not the Red Prince, not a target, just Ali." But that future never came, because 3 weeks later he was dead. The wedding photos were still being processed when Salameh died. The photographer had hundreds of images, developing them, preparing albums, prints for the family. The first proofs arrived at Georgina's home on January 23, 1979. The day after Salameh was killed. She opened the envelope, saw her husband, smiling, alive, happy. In the photos, he had a future. In reality, he was in pieces, literally. The car bomb had destroyed his body so completely that identification was difficult. She held the photos, images of a man who'd been alive days ago, who'd held her, who'd promised her a future. And now, he was gone. And all she had were these frozen moments. Proof that once briefly they'd been happy. The wedding photo, the official portrait of the couple, was never framed, never hung on a wall, never displayed. Georgina couldn't look at it, couldn't bear the reminder of what she'd lost, of the future that had been promised and stolen. The photo stayed in an envelope, in a drawer, unseen. Ali Hassan Salameh never saw his wedding photo, never saw how happy he looked, never saw the evidence of that brief moment when he'd believed in the future. He died before the photos were developed, before he could look back and remember, before he could hold the physical proof of his happiness. The photo existed, but he never saw it. And somehow that makes it worse. That the moment was captured, preserved. But the person at the center of it never got to witness his own joy reflected back at him. The assassination happened on January 22, 1979, around 3:30 p.m. A Beirut street, Salameh's convoy. A parked car exploded as his vehicle passed. Massive bomb. Precise timing. The car was obliterated. Salameh died instantly, along with his bodyguards and several civilian bystanders. Mossad had finally gotten him, after years of hunting, after mistakes, after near misses. They'd succeeded. Operation Wrath of God claimed its primary target. The mastermind of Munich was dead. Justice, from Israel's perspective, was served, but from another perspective, a 3-week-old husband was murdered. A man who'd just gotten married, who just celebrated, who just started believing in a future. The timing was cruel, not because Mossad waited for the wedding, they didn't know or care, but because the wedding made the death more tragic. If he'd died in 1977, he would have been a revolutionary, a target, an enemy eliminated, but dying 3 weeks after getting married? That's a husband killed, a future destroyed, a celebration turned into mourning. The context changes the meaning. Same death, different story. Georgina was pregnant when Salameh died. She didn't know yet. Found out weeks later. She gave birth to their son, Ali Hassan Salameh Jr., named after his father, a boy who would never meet the man whose name he carried. She raised him alone, told him about his father, about the revolutionary, about the man Israel wanted dead, about the husband she'd loved, but also about the wedding, about those 3 weeks when they'd been happy, when the future had seemed possible, when Ali Hassan Salameh had been just a groom, not a target. She showed him the photos eventually, when he was old enough. This was your father. This was us. This was happiness before it ended. The boy looked at images of a man he'd never know, a father who died before he was born, a celebration that had happened before his existence. What do you do with that? With photos of joy that preceded your own life? With evidence that your father was happy before tragedy made him a martyr? You carry it, the weight of inherited memory, of a story that's yours, but not yours, of a father who's legend and stranger simultaneously. Ali Hassan Salameh Jr. grew up in that shadow, son of the Red Prince, child of a woman who'd been Miss Universe, born from love, born into loss. The wedding became symbolic, not just of Salameh's death, but of the entire Israeli-Palestinian conflict, brief moments of happiness, hopes for the future, then violence, destruction, loss, over and over, the pattern repeating, celebrations interrupted, futures canceled. Joy turned to mourning. Salameh's wedding wasn't unique in its tragedy, it was emblematic. One story among thousands, one celebration among countless that ended too soon. But it was documented, photographed, preserved. The images exist. The happiness is visible. The future that didn't happen is captured in film. That's what makes it powerful. The specificity, the faces, the evidence of joy before sorrow. Not abstract, not statistical, but human, personal, real. The question that haunts the wedding photos: did Salameh deserve to die? He was involved in Munich, in terrorism, in attacks that killed civilians. From Israel's perspective, absolutely he deserved it. But he was also human, capable of love, of joy, of hope for the future. From his family's perspective, he was a husband, a father-to-be, a man who deserved to live. Both things are true. He committed acts that justified his targeting, and he was a person whose death created profound loss. Holding both truths simultaneously is uncomfortable, but it's honest. We want simple stories, good guys and bad guys, justice and injustice, clear lines. But Salameh's wedding photos complicate that. Show the humanity of someone designated as enemy. Show the joy of someone marked for death. That doesn't justify what he did, doesn't minimize the victims of Munich, doesn't make his death wrong, but it makes it complicated, tragic, human, and maybe that's important. Maybe we need to see the wedding photos, need to remember that enemies are also people, that targeted killings kill humans, not abstractions, not to stop the targeting, not necessarily, but to understand the full cost, the full weight, the full humanity of what's being done. Mossad agents who planned Salameh's assassination probably never saw the wedding photos, never knew about the celebration 3 weeks before, never thought about the pregnant widow or the unborn child. They saw a target, a threat, a necessary elimination, and that's how they could do it. By not seeing the wedding, by not imagining the celebration, by not thinking about the photos that would become memorials. Dehumanization isn't always intentional. Sometimes it's just not seeing, not knowing, not asking. What was he celebrating 3 weeks ago? What did he hope for? What did he believe about his future? Those questions don't change the operational calculus, but they change the human understanding. And maybe both matter. Maybe you can eliminate a threat and still acknowledge the humanity of what you're destroying. Or maybe you can't. Maybe that kind of awareness makes the work impossible. Maybe you have to choose, see the target as human or complete the mission. Salameh's wedding photos force that question. They're evidence of his humanity, of his capacity for joy, of his hope for the future, and they're evidence that all of that was destroyed. Intentionally. Deliberately, as an act of war. Is that justice? Is that tragedy? Is that just the reality of conflict? All of the above, simultaneously, uncomfortable as that is. Years after Salameh's death, Georgina Rizk gave an interview. Rare for her. She valued privacy, didn't want to be defined by being his widow, but she agreed to talk about Ali, about the wedding, about the photos. Do you ever look at the wedding photos? Long pause. Sometimes, not often. It's painful. Why? Because he looks so happy, so full of hope. And I know what's coming. He didn't. In those photos, he thinks he has a future. And I know he has 3 weeks. Do you wish you'd never married him? No, never. Those 3 weeks were real. The happiness was real. Yes, it ended in tragedy, but it existed. We had that. What would you want people to know about him? That he was more than what Israel said he was. More than a terrorist. More than a target. He was a person. Complicated. Flawed. But capable of love. Of joy. Of hope. Does that matter? Given what he did? Yes. It matters. Not to justify, but to understand. He wasn't a monster. He was a man who made choices, terrible choices, but he was human. The wedding photos prove that. The wedding photos show that. Whether they prove it, that's for others to decide, but they're evidence of his humanity, for whatever that's worth. For whatever that's worth, the question lingers. In the grand scheme of Israeli-Palestinian conflict, does Salameh's humanity matter? Does the fact that he had a wedding, that he smiled, that he hoped for the future, does any of that change anything? Practically no. He was still targeted, still killed, still replaced by someone else who would continue the fight. But morally, emotionally, humanly, maybe it matters. Maybe seeing the wedding photos makes us think differently about targeted killings, about cycles of violence, about the human cost of endless conflict. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe we look at the photos, feel sad for a moment, and then remember Munich. Remember the civilians killed. Remember that Salameh wasn't innocent. And the photos fade. The humanity recedes. The justification remains. Both responses are valid, both are incomplete. The truth is somewhere in the complexity. In the space between he deserved it and this was tragedy. In the acknowledgement that humans are capable of both love and violence, that weddings and warfare can exist in the same life, That's what the photos show. Not innocence, not guilt, just humanity. In all its contradiction. Every operation has more than one story. Most channels tell you about the assassination, the perfect timing, the successful elimination. We tell you about the wedding, the celebration, the photos he never saw, the happiness that lasted 3 weeks. Not to justify, not to condemn, but to remember. Before he was a target, he was a groom. Before he was eliminated, he was a husband. Before he was a statistic, he was a person. And all of those things were true, simultaneously, impossibly, humanly. Subscribe for the stories they don't tell. The weddings before the funerals, the celebrations before the violence, the humanity in the middle of war. Because seeing the full picture doesn't change history, but it changes understanding. And understanding might not solve anything, but it's honest. And honesty matters, even when it's painful, especially when it's painful. Ali Hassan Salameh never saw his wedding photos, never held the evidence of his own happiness, never looked back at that celebration and remembered. He died thinking he had a future. And maybe that's a mercy, that he didn't know, didn't see it coming, died still believing. Or maybe it's a tragedy, that the happiness was so brief, that the future never came, that the photos exist, but he never saw them. Both. Again, both. That's the story. Not simple, not satisfying, not resolved, just human, complicated, real. The wedding photo he never saw, the celebration that became a memorial, the 3 weeks between joy and death. That's what we remember. Not to justify, not to condemn, just to see, fully, honestly, humanly, because that's what the photos demand, to be seen, to be acknowledged, to matter, even if we're not sure how, even if it doesn't change anything, even if it just makes us uncomfortable. Maybe that discomfort is the point. Maybe we should feel something when we see a wedding photo of a man who died 3 weeks later. Maybe that feeling, whatever it is part of understanding the real cost of conflict, not the strategic cost, not the operational cost, but the human cost, the wedding that ended too soon, the photos that became memorials, the future that never happened. That's the story. Make of it what you will.